Hello, welcome. This is the Making It Happen Farm Financial Calendar tool. And before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick tech review and make sure, can everybody hear me? I'm talking right now, so hopefully you can all hear me right now. At the bottom of your screen, great, thank you, Evan and Seth, for letting me know you can hear me. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a little chat window. There's several icons, so you can chat, send a chat to all of us. I think several of you have discovered that already. There is also the option to raise your hand if you have a question. And if you want to ask your question in the live voice, we can always give you the option to unmute yourself. So raise your hand and let us know. And there's also a Q&A window, and you can post your questions here, and it helps us keep track of the questions that people have and if they've been answered or not. So if you want to post your questions there, you can do that as well there. But before we get started, I wanted to let Kira from the Carrot Project say hello and say a few words about the Carrot Project.
Yeah, hi, thank you all for joining us. So my name is Kira Bennett-Hamilton. I'm a client services coordinator for the Carrot Project. And just very briefly, we are a nonprofit organization. We work to increase the number of profitable and successful farms and food businesses in New England and the Hudson Valley. We do this through a combination of direct services, including business assistance, financing, trainings, and webinars like this one. And we also use our experience in the sector to conduct research and help others do the same. If you want to learn more about our services, please visit www.thecarrotproject.org or email me at businessassistance@thecarrotproject.org. So a little bit about the context behind this tool. Through our work with clients over the past decade, in addition to a 2-year research project called Measuring Profitability and Success, we found that financial management skills are really crucial for helping farmers meet their goals, which in turn helps them continue to sustain the environment and the communities through their work. So at the request of farmers, we've created tools including this financial management calendar that we're going to discuss today. And the overarching purpose of that is just to help you manage your farm business more effectively, which it does by providing guidelines about why you'd want to do certain kinds of financial tasks, when to do them, what you'll need in order to do so, and the different steps required. This will be most useful if you can follow along with a calendar document. So if you don't have them in front of you now, take a look at the chat window in just a couple of minutes. There will be a link to it. There are 2 parts, and we will be discussing both of them. All right, I'll pass it back to you, Julia, to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Kira. My name is Julia Shanks, and I'm from Julia Shanks Food Consulting, also the author of The Farmer's Office, and I provide business assistance for the Carrot Project. And as Kira mentioned, through all of these business trainings and workshops that we do, we often provide a lot of tools and resources that you can use to help you manage your business and be more profitable. But figuring out how and when and what you need to do can be a bit of a challenge. So we're going to go over this financial calendar tool just as a way to help guide you through all the different things that you need to do in your business. Just a quick disclosure, we have numbers in here that are thoroughly fictitious and for illustrative purposes only. As you plan for your business and your needs, you'll need to look at your own financial data. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about why bother, why we're going through all this rigmarole of bookkeeping, and then we're going to go over the calendar. So we're going to go over the calendar in general formatting terms, then we'll go over some of the concepts, and then we'll review some of the specific tasks. And that is going to be the theoretical and aspirational part of the workshop. And then Kian of Three Maples Market Garden is going to tell us how it really is and give us the farmer's perspective on financial management and how we get it all done. So why bother? No doubt that every business financial workshop you've been to has hammered into you the need to do regular bookkeeping and data entry. And we all do this because we want you to help make decisions about your business. And if you do it on a regular basis, then it's a lot more manageable. If you wait until the end of the season, it's going to be overwhelming and you're not going to do it. With good bookkeeping, you have good numbers to make business decisions. And when you have these numbers, you can better manage cash flow. And of course, you can file your taxes. And if you've been keeping good records throughout the year, tax filing is pretty straightforward. And obviously taxes are, kind of a big concern, especially now as we're approaching April 15th, but there's so much richness in the numbers that we want to make sure we harness that. So let's look at the actual calendar, and it's a tool to help you better track your finances so you can stay on top of it, file your taxes, etc. So the calendar tool, it's 2 parts, and we have a checklist and we have a table of tasks, and we're going to get to that in a few minutes, the details. And then we also have operational managerial tasks, and we're going to talk about how to make it work for you. So the first part of the calendar tool is part 1, and you can see it says right up at the top, part 1. And the calendar tool is divided up into sections, and it has suggestions on how frequently you should do things. So some things you want to do on a daily basis or monthly, quarterly basis, or annually. And these are suggestions, and you can see, for example, some of the things are monthly or quarterly, and it really depends on the nature of your business and the frequency that makes sense for you. For a smaller farm business with not a lot of transactions, you may not need to do things quite as frequently. Also, during the slower seasons, you may not need to do some of these tasks as regularly, but as you get busier, perhaps counterintuitively, you need to stay on top of your financial management on a more regular basis. We also divide up the tasks into managerial tasks and operational tasks. And the operational tasks are the day-to-day things that you need to do. They don't require a whole lot of mental power, but they just need to be done. And these operational tasks, as it were, are the things that allow us to do the managerial things. As an example, if you don't enter your sales and expenses on a regular basis, which is an operational task, then you can't compare your sales projections to your actuals. And you can't see your historical data to create projections for the future. Any questions so far? Next to some of these tasks, you'll see a little number, and those numbers are going to be a reference to things that are on the second part of the calendar. So we can see that little 1 right there, and that references us to part 2 of the calendar. You can see a little bit of a bigger screenshot. So part 2 is where all the detail is. Now, part 1 is the checklist to give you the quick overview, and the second part is where we can get into a lot more of the detail. So, once you get into the habit of doing all of these things, you'll kind of know the detail of the tasks, but you have a nice reminder, and you can put the checklist up in your barn or on the door of the walk-in cooler, have it handy, and then you can refer to the details of what you need to do on as you become familiar. So you can see down the left side, we have the numbers, and those numbers correspond to the numbers that we saw on the checklist. And then across the top, we have different items. We have the task. So the task mirrors what was on the checklist. We have the goal, as why are we bothering with this? We have the tools and the data needed to complete the task, and then details on the process that you need to do. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll keep going, but feel free to jump in with questions. So before you get started, you're going to need some things in place to make the most of it. First of all, it helps to have a monthly cash flow projection, and you can find the link for the cash flow projections on the Carrot Project website. And this is this is something you can do right now when things are still slow and before things get crazy. And having projections gives you a tool to plot out, what you're going to do through the course of the year. And as you want to compare your actuals to projections, you have your projections. The other thing that you'll want to do is have a system for tracking your revenue, your sales, and your expenses. And certainly we recommend QuickBooks, and there are a bunch of webinars on the Carrot Project website about QuickBooks. I'll also be doing some webinars starting next week, which we can send you a link about. And if you don't want to use QuickBooks, you're not ready to take that plunge, you can certainly use Excel. And Excel is a great way to organize all of your revenue and all of your expenses into a neat, tidy order, and helps you to do summations, etc. And then it helps to put the actual reminders in your calendar so you don't forget. And once you get into the habit, maybe you don't need the reminder, but it's good to, plot it out. All right, so next we're going to go over some of the actual tasks on the calendar so that you can get a better sense of how it works and how you can get the most out of it. So monitoring cash, that is one of the weekly or bi-weekly tasks that you're supposed to do. And you can see that it's under the managerial tasks under weekly or bi-weekly. And it has a little 1 next to it, which tells us to look at number 1 on our detailed part 2 of the calendar. And we can see right here, well, maybe you can't really see because it's kind of small, so I'm going to break it out a little bit in the next slide. But you can see right here, number 1, monitor cash balances, and here we have all the detail. All right, well, that was really small, so let's look at it here. So the goal of monitoring your cash is to make sure you have a positive cash balance. Obviously, nobody wants to bounce checks, and if you start bouncing checks, then you might incur some late fees. So keeping a watch on your cash balance helps you stay up to date on it. And the things that you'll need is your current bank balance, and it helps to also know what checks are already out there that may not have been cashed. Sometimes, you might write a check to an employee and they may shove it in their wallet and not cash it for a week, which is not something I would do. If you send me a check, I promise you I will cash it instantly. But some people don't do that, which is shocking. Anyway, it's helpful to know your current bank balance as well as checks that might be out in the universe and uncashed. You want to have a list of your bills due that are due in the coming week or so until you check your cash balance again. You want an estimate of your additional expenses that you're expecting, as well as your estimates of your cash coming in. And these cash coming in could be from your cash flow projections. So where does it come from? So the bank balance, you want to look online at your bank balance, and if you have online banking, that's a great place to go. As I mentioned a few moments ago, you want to be careful that there may be some outstanding checks. So if you're up to date in your QuickBooks, then that might actually be a better place to be looking for your actual bank balance. Or if you're doing old-fashioned with a check register, with a paper register, looking at your check register can also tell you what your bank balance is. In terms of your bills due, it really helps to have a special place where you keep all your bills so that when you sit down to do your cash monitoring, you know where they are. If you're entering bills into QuickBooks, you can run your accounts payable report and see what's coming up. And you can also look at your calendar to see what's coming up. You might say, oh, geez, the end of the month is coming up. That's when I have payroll due. That's when my rent is due. So you may know just by the cycle of your business that on the 31st or the 1st of the month, you may have a slew of bills coming up. In terms of anticipating cash coming in, you can look at your cash flow projections to see what you expect. You may have listed out the different farmers markets that you're going to and how much cash you anticipate earning at each market. And you can look at your calendar to see what things are coming up as well. So how do you actually go through this process? So you want to start with your beginning bank balance, and you say, okay, well, I've got 4,100 in the bank. And then you say, all right, well, these are the bills I have coming up this week. These are my other payments. And your expected cash inflow, you know that you're going to a farmer's market. You anticipate that you're going to get a few CSA checks to come in. So if we start with the beginning bank balance, we subtract our expected cash outflows, and then we add back in our expected cash inflows, we can see our available cash. And we can say, okay, you know what, we're good. We got 4,500 in available cash. So you know you're in good shape to pay all your bills and not worry about bouncing checks. Now that was a really positive scenario, but sometimes things aren't really straightforward. So you may realize that you've got, large payments coming up, maybe, the first of the month, and you happen to have payroll that week and your rent and your insurance payment. It happens to be the week of, the one time a year where you're paying your insurance. It may be that you have a lot of payments in one week, and it may not be enough to cover all. You may not have enough cash coming in with your beginning bank balance to pay all your bills. And in this example, we're actually short $450. So, knowing in advance that you might have problems paying all of your bills this week, you need to consider your strategies. Number one, what can you do to drum up more sales or more cash to cover that shortfall? And rather than just start writing checks and hoping that everything goes okay, you can strategize about which bills you can delay a week or two so that you don't bounce checks. You may owe money to, one of your suppliers who's more friendly than, let's say, the credit card company who is not friendly and will charge you lots of interest. Certainly not a great position to be in, but then you can start planning for the following week to make sure that this doesn't create a negative spiral. Any questions about the monitoring cash balances regular task, calendar task? So the next task we're going to talk about is comparing actuals to projections. And this actually ties back into monitoring our cash flow because this can help clue us in to what might happen. Are we going to get ourselves into a cash flow predicament? So monitoring cash flow is a comparing actuals to projections, excuse me. Comparing actuals to projections is a monthly or quarterly task, and that would also be a managerial task. And you can see that there is a number 5 right next to it. So that's referring to the 5th item on our detailed checklist. And we can go to our detailed checklist and we can see, task number 5 and 6 and what we need to do. So obviously that's kind of small, hard to see. So let's look at it in easier to read format. So we're calling this comparing actual to projections. And in QuickBooks, you might have a budget, and budget and projections are used somewhat interchangeably. But QuickBooks calls it budget, so don't get too thrown off by the lingo. And basically the goal of comparing our actuals to projections is to make sure that we're staying on track with our target profits. And, going back to monitoring our cash balances, part of that is making sure we're staying on track so that we don't run into problems. When we created our budgets, presumably we were planning, we created a budget that was going to keep us cash flow positive or cash positive throughout the year. So we want to make sure we're on track and not getting ourselves into trouble. So what do we need for comparing our actuals to projections? First of all, we need those cash flow projections. So you'll remember back in the first part of the webinar, we said, the tools that you need to get started is cash flow projections. So we recommend you get that going. Then you want to have your complete sales report for the comparable period, as well as expenses for the comparable period, and it helps to export these reports into Excel. So where does all of this come from? Where's all the data come from? So we talked about the cash flow projections, going back to that tool on the website. And for your sales report, you can go to QuickBooks and run a profit and loss report, and that's going to show you all of your revenue and all of your expenses for the selected period. So if you're doing this on a monthly basis, you'll want to make sure that you run your report on a monthly basis, or if quarterly, you can run it on a quarterly basis. Likewise, your expenses are also on that same report. And if you're using Excel, you can make sure that you're categorizing your expenses and your revenue in the same period as your budget. So, if you're doing a monthly cash flow projection by month, that was great. If you're doing a cash flow projection by month, then you also want to track your sales and expenses by month as well. And then, excuse me, when you run your reports, it does help to look at all of your expenses as a percentage of sales. And we'll talk about that in a minute, why that's so important. So if you've entered your budget into QuickBooks, or your projections into QuickBooks, you can actually run a report to compare your budget to projections. And we can look at the difference. We can, see how much we're over budget or under budget. And, for sales, if you're over budget, that's awesome. For your expenses, if you're under budget, that's good. So what's interesting, though, is that some things, we want to see things as a percentage, because in this example, our sales were higher than our projections, which is great. But if we look at our cost of goods and look at that as the raw number, it's like, oh, wow, we went over budget. That's not good. We got issues. We got to correct that. But we calculated our cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue. So if we think about it as a percentage of revenue, we had higher sales than expected, so we probably will have higher cost of goods than expected as well. So it's helpful to look at it not just as the raw number, how did we do compared to our budget, but how did we do as a percentage? And when we look at it as a percentage, we can say, oh, well, our cost of goods sold was 62% of revenue, and we projected that it would be 68% of revenue. So actually, we're doing a lot better than we thought we would do. So we calculated the percent off of our budget is by subtracting our projected, or our actuals minus our projected, over our budget. And then we can get the percentage difference. So somebody's asking, how do we export reports from QuickBooks into Excel? Depending on which version you're in, there should be a little icon that allows you to export it. If you're using QuickBooks Online, you should be able to export it to Excel, but I think some of the more simplified versions may only let you export to Excel, but I'm pretty sure in both cases you can export your reports to Excel. You just need to find the little icon. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. So here's another example of comparing actuals to projections. And, you can go down the list and you can say, oh, wow, we did a great job. We're under budget. We're under budget. We're under budget. Uh-oh. Looks like we might have had a expensive car repair, truck repair that we weren't anticipating. And we went totally over budget there. So it's not a disaster, depending on how tight your cash is. But if you went over budget one month, then you need to compensate for it in the coming months. So you want to make sure that you keep on track. So by comparing your actuals to projections that you might need to make adjustments in coming months to make sure that you don't get yourself into a cash crisis later on. Any questions? So the third thing we're going to talk about is reviewing our pricing structure. And that is one of the annual tasks that you want to do. And it's part of reviewing our cost of production. And in terms of reviewing our pricing structure, it's cost of production and understanding our competitive charges. But today we're just going to focus on the cost of production part. So we can see that it is an annual task, and looks like somebody is unmuted. If you want to mute yourself. So Anne is asking about what vegetable farmers should include in their cost of goods sold. And that is an awesome question, and something that me and my accounting buddies debate all the time over bottles of wine, far in depth. Cost of goods sold, I traditionally think of cost of goods sold as things that we purchase directly for resale, but also you can consider your cost of production a cost of goods sold. So you can have all your direct operating supplies in there and all your production labor. So depending on how you think about your business, you could put either the items that you purchased for direct resale, or you can put your production costs into your cost of goods sold. Does that answer your question? All right, so back to reviewing our pricing structure and our cost of goods sold. We can see that number 10 is where we need to look on our detailed task list. And we'll go to our detailed task list, and we can see number 10, what do we need to do? And we'll go to a more blown out version so we can actually see what it says. So in terms of the annual analysis of cost of production, our goal is to understand the true cost of what it costs us to grow tomatoes, raise chickens, cattle, dairy. What does it cost us to get our products out so that we can sell them? And if we understand our costs, we can price them better for profitability. And also, as we think about our growth strategies, we want to know which products are most profitable, and we can focus our growth on where we make the most profit. So the things you'll need is your production tracking worksheet, your labor tracking worksheet, and your direct expenses. So where do the numbers come from? So your production records, what did you sell? And that's a really good proxy for what you grew. And actually what you sell in some ways is more important than what you grow, because you sometimes have to grow more than you can actually sell. So part of your production cost might be overproducing a little bit. As an example, if you're raising meat birds, you may need to purchase 900 chicks in order to sell 800 chickens, and that's just a cost of production. So you can look at your sales and invoicing, or if you have a tracking spreadsheet, you can do that as well. If you're tracking your labor on a Excel spreadsheet, you can also track your labor in QuickBooks. And then you can go to QuickBooks or your Excel spreadsheet to see your expenses for the production cost, so the direct expenses. And I want to just take a moment to qualify all of this cost of production, that this is the kind of thing that you may not do every product every year. And I know a lot of the diversified vegetable farmers you may grow like 50 items, and you're not going to necessarily track all 50 items for cost of production, but you may want to track 3 or 4 every year and focusing on what you sell the most of. So we can see that under the operational tasks, we're recording our labor and our production data. So if we've been keeping up on these daily operational tasks, the mindless, sit down and just write it down in a book, then it means that we can do the managerial tasks at the end of the year. So it's all kind of building on itself. It's not meant to just, create busy work. It's getting you positioned to be able to do that kind of robust analysis at the end of the year. And likewise, recording your revenue in your QuickBooks or Excel spreadsheet. So here's an example of a chicken farmer, and he tracked all of his expenses, and he tracked his production to see what he sold. And I just want to highlight, he sold 5,800 dozen eggs. And I want to highlight that he also tracked his labor, and he put a cost or a value to his time. And even though he's self-employed and he's doing it all himself, it's really important to recognize that your labor is a cost of production. Even if you're not paying yourself, there is value to it. And if you're not doing the work, somebody else is doing it, and you need to be able to pay them and have that set up into your pricing strategy, into your cost of production. If you break your leg, God forbid, you want to be able to afford to pay somebody, or if your business grows, you want to be able to afford to pay somebody and have that worked into your price. So based on these numbers, we have, a seasonal total of what he spent in terms of his time, as well as what he spent in terms of his expenses. And we can see the seasonal total of $25,600 to produce 5,800 dozen eggs. And so that costs, oh, sorry, I was a little distracted by my animation. I was looking at the timing. So as an example, for the 372 hours that he did on his regular chores, which could be estimated, he might say, well, I spent about an hour on chores every day. And if he allocates $15 per hour for his time, then that's 95 cents per dozen just on the basic chores. And when he adds it all up, we can see that it costs him $4.35 to produce a dozen eggs. And now he can start to think about the right price. Depending on where he's selling his eggs, he may need to sell, $6 or $7 a dozen based on this cost. Aaron is asking if overhead costs are somehow factored into the cost of production. And that is a great question. And we're not factoring it in here. We need to factor it in at some point. And, part of the pricing strategy, and we talk about this in the MIH videos. Kira, are those videos online for people to watch, the MIH videos?
They are available online. Yes, I can put a link in the chat window.
Awesome. So Aaron is asking about the overhead costs. So, that $4.35, if you sell your eggs for $6, it's not $1.65 that's straight profit. You still need funds to cover the overhead expenses. You have your production overhead, like using the tractor, heating the barn, and then you have your general overhead expenses like liability insurance. So you want to make sure that you're pricing your products to cover not just your direct operating expenses, but also your overhead. So great question, Aaron. Thank you. And hopefully that answered it. Any other questions? So I shared with you the aspirational management of your business, financial management. And, I wanted to talk about the more realistic way that this happens in the real world. And Kian from Three Maples Farm is going to share with us the farmer's perspective. And now I'm going to figure out how to let Kian. Okay, so Kian, you should be able to control the PowerPoint now. Oh, actually, you know what? You can't because it's not, sorry, never mind, you can't.
I think you're just going to have to Vanna White for me.
I'm going to, yes, awesome. Before I Vanna White for you, Seth was asking, do I know of any tools of collecting labor hours per task? So there are a lot of different apps out there that you can track. I know that Beat Clock is out there. I know that one thing that some farmers do is I recommend taking a representative day. So, if you can extrapolate out, for example, with the egg farmer, that you spend an hour every day watering and feeding the chickens and doing basic chores, you can extrapolate out for the year. So yes, there are apps out there, and then also you can figure out a system, what's the smallest amount you can do, and then extrapolate out. All right, I'm going to mute myself and let you take it away, Kian.
Thanks, Julia. So I'm Kian Dalzell. I'm one of the farmers at Three Maples Market Garden. And I like that this tool is out there. I didn't know about it when I started, which might explain the first 5 years or so of my farm's finances. But it's such an ideal scenario. And because my farm is fairly small, it doesn't always apply as directly as I wanted it to initially, which made me kind of freeze in my boots for a little while. So this is the 9th year of production for Three Maples. I'm about 8 years into the numbers in terms of full seasons. And my wife and I grow vegetables for a CSA and a farm stand with a small amount of wholesaling, not really much, usually less than $1,000 a year in terms of the wholesaling. And we've ranged from 1 to 3 acres over the course of that 8 years that have been completed. And most years we've been at about 2 to 3 acres. So this is my lived experience, but the numbers are still made up. I am not yet comfortable enough to just open my books to everyone who signs up for these webinars, maybe someday when they're clean enough, but they're not yet. So we're going to look at the calendar tool again. So at my scale, all of these things that say, daily, I probably don't have to do them daily. I have to do them weekly. You can click forward. Thank you. The things that are weekly or bi-weekly, I'm probably doing bi-weekly. Some of those I might be doing monthly, but I try to do it bi-weekly. And then if I find that I don't need to do something quite that frequently, then I'll space it out a little bit more. Monthly to quarterly stuff tends to be quarterly, but the annual stuff still has to be annual. But because the weekly assessments don't take a lot of time, you can kind of toy with that. For my farm, for the purposes for my farm, managerial tasks tend to be assigned to one person. My wife and I both track our hours, but I'm the only one who's really sitting down and looking at all of the numbers on a regular basis. Except for the managerial tasks at the annual size. When it comes to the annual stuff, we look at it together. If you have more than just you as a decision maker, definitely involve everyone when you're looking at those things, especially things like your business plan, your pricing structure. You may forget something that your business partner or your spouse or your kid, if your kid is part of that business, is going to pick up. My 3-year-old is not helpful with that, but someday I hope she will be. And then there's a question of like, how do you make it work? So with a small business, a really small business, there's less administrative time. Trying to figure out how to make everything actually work in your life is really important. And part of that are things like, what can you automate so that you don't have to think about it all the time? Things like semi-automating or automating your information by pulling information from your bank statements, the PDF, and putting it in Excel, or importing the information into QuickBooks, and figuring out how to make that work. Clipboards, notebooks, apps, whatever is going to actually work for you is the helpful stuff. And then the world of the mobile office, because most of us don't spend an awful lot of time inside. My trick is that I have to overschedule for the amount of time I actually need to do something, which gives me more flexibility. So I regularly schedule stuff, and that lets me move things around when I need to. Generally speaking, don't wait for rainy days. I did that initially the first couple of years. I was like, oh, I'll just do it when it rains. And then we had a drought. And then I didn't do a whole bunch of stuff that I needed to for about 3 months. It was a bad idea. So for me, what that means is scheduling things consistently. I'm always scheduling stuff on the same day of the week to make things a little bit more regular for me. I know that that's not always what happens, but it's nice to know that it's there. So this is how I schedule my time. This is just Google Calendar. I don't have a smartphone because I live in an area where cell service is terrible and smartphones just drain the batteries constantly. So not having a smartphone, I end up looking at things mostly retrospectively. So some things that you can see on this, the purple spots across the bottom are my admin time. The one on Sunday, which is all the way on the left, is planning. My wife and I do that together. We're doing a weekly planning hour. Ideally, it's usually not actually an hour. What tasks need to happen that week? That ends up being when we figure out what the week's going to look like roughly. The ones on Friday and Saturday are my weekly on Friday and not so weekly, bi-weekly or monthly stuff on Saturday. And those are just set up to recur. All of those will just keep showing up every week so that when I look at my calendar, I'm looking at what absolutely needs to be there. Just so that you have a sense of how kind of fuzzy this looks for me, the blue spots across the bottom are dinner and bedtime. I'm the primary parent for dinner and bedtime. The green blocks that are kind of blocked off are primary parent days so that my wife can work on. The rest of the time we're kind of swapping back and forth. The gray things across the middle are lunch because I actually have to remind myself to eat. And so I do have that and I end up fitting it in. Most of the stuff though, the regular green blocks that you see most of there, those are things I put in afterward. Every couple of days, I'm looking back at, ideally it's every day. In August, it's probably every couple of days. What have I been doing for the past day or two? And kind of tracking it like a consultant does. What was I doing when? And it's rough, but it's a couple of minutes a day tracking what I was doing and when I was doing it. And then when it is a really rainy day, every few weeks, every month, or when I get to one of those bigger blocks, I can translate that into an Excel spreadsheet. So because we use Google Calendar, we have shared calendars. I can see my wife's, she can see mine. And that means that if one of us has a doctor's appointment, or if somebody's got a meeting, because we both do a little bit of consulting, less during the summer, but it's still there, we are able to see that and schedule everything around it. And it just made it a lot easier to be able to share that stuff. And she does have a smartphone and just charges it all the time. And so we can't have the same app. For some things, though, she's considering looking at apps. And there are definitely a lot of farmers who are finding a lot of help from that. I would break it, so it's not worth it to me. It really depends on what works for you, what's going to work in your life. What works for me is my mobile office. So I end up I have 2 fields in 2 different towns and have to go between them, which means that I end up spending not a lot of time, but periodically throughout the day or throughout the week, I'm spending time in my car. And because of that, everything needed to be in my car so that I could have it at hand when I needed it. And also when I get stuck in a rainstorm, then I can do something productive in the car, which is nice. So I have a stenographer's notebook. I bought it for a couple of bucks, probably at Staples. And it has, from the front, if you flip the front over its gas and mileage, it lets me keep track of this stuff. Full disclosure, I would not be doing that, except that I have a secondhand car. And when I bought it, it was already 10 years old. And it had 10 years of data about gas mileage. And it just seemed terrible to drop that torch. So I had never done this before this car, but with this car, I've actually been tracking it. What it does let me do along with that is note what trips are for what business. So I have consulting, my wife has consulting, we have a farm, 3 different things that we need to track mileage for our taxes. So it goes in the same area. That way I know where it is and it's convenient. This lives in the side pocket in my door, so it's right there. And then if you flip the notebook over and open it, from the back page, it's the farm stand sales and notes. So the sales are on the left-hand side, date and dollars. And on the right-hand side, there are notes about what's sold because we don't keep a really strict inventory. When we're bigger we will probably need to do that at the scale that we're at. That didn't end up making a lot of sense. We tried to do it and it didn't quite work. Maybe we'll figure out a better system for it. But in the meanwhile, what sold really well, what's new when things show up for the first time in the farm stand, what the farm stand sign said if we had an increase in sales, and when Facebook posts land a lot of people at the farm stand all tend to be noted on the right-hand side. So the information that I want when I'm sitting down at the end of the year to figure out planning, seating schedule for the following year, planning for our business plan and marketing plans, which we look at sometime around January every year. And then, so that's on the left side. On the right side is my on my glove box. And this is my mobile office in my glove compartment. So we have a notebook because I always need one, and some days I forget one. So it's basically the backup notebook so that I can put my tasks or whatever notes I need to remember later somewhere so I don't lose it. A backup invoice book. So that's not actually the primary one. It's because I once lost my invoice or it was damaged in a wet produce box, and I was so embarrassed when I got to the grocery store that I was selling to, and I had to ask for a scrap of paper to scrawl out on a piece of paper. And I know their bookkeeper was laughing about it too. A lot of farms do end up handing in invoices like that, but it doesn't look as professional, and that bothered me. So I ended up buying a second sales invoice book, and one of them just lives in the glove compartment. That way I always have the backup in case something happens to the initial invoice, I can rewrite it. And that's been really helpful. I haven't had to use it very often, but it's one of those things that a little bit of preparation means less anxiety. And for a couple of bucks, I'll take it, you know? The third thing is a clear money back. The clear bag is just something that, again, I probably picked up at a local Staples or someplace, and it's where the money goes out of the farm stand when I just pull it at the end of the night, which means that it's not necessarily counted and sorted and all of that. It just kind of gets shoved in there. And then the fourth one is the deposit bag, sorted money, ready to go. The differences, having two of them, ended up making it a lot easier for me. I initially just had one bag, and then I had to keep track of everything every day and sort through things and prep a deposit every day. And I found that didn't work for me. So I actually have 2 or 3 of the clear bags. And that way, if I bring one in the house to actually deal with it, there's still one in the car. And the deposit bag looks funny. It's smaller. It's not a real deposit bag from a bank. And one of the reasons is it fits better in my glove compartment. And another reason is that just because it's functional, it doesn't mean that it can't be pretty. I liked that one. It was canvas. It felt good. I don't know. So we ended up with that one. The one thing is that if you have a deposit bag like that, don't drop it in the overnight bank deposit box. You will not get it back. Their tellers will keep it from you. And then, so that's the like mobile everyday. That's where a lot of my daily or weekly tasks end up happening, where my data entry goes over the course of the season, and then periodically I bring it inside and deal with it in the actual shared office. So have a shared office, or have an office, have a designated spot that you can, put things, and then plan during this colder, snowier time of the year, plan where everything should go. You're probably not going to get it right. I still haven't gotten it quite right, but it's important to do something with it. Figure out what things are going to look like. Think about what it's going to look like in May, in planting season, in August when you're losing your head, if you're a vegetable grower. And then figuring out an assigned spot for everything. If you share your office with someone else, making sure everyone knows where the assigned spots are. And then what other tools are you going to need? For me, figuring out that every year I was losing the deposit stamp to get things into the farm checking account. Sometime, in the fall or winter, it would go missing, and then I would have to find it again in the spring. So now it has a spot that it lives. Took me a year or two to figure that out, but it's a simple thing that makes my life easier when I'm doing this. So is it just the farm office? Is it your personal office? Are you going to have kids in that space? Are you going to have multiple businesses working from the same desk? And what's that going to change? And my farm office looks like this. It's got a spot assigned for everything. It's not perfect. There are a lot of non-farm projects and farm projects that kind of get rotated through. You can see that I desperately need to sort my mail up in the left-hand corner. You cannot see that there's another one that's just as messy above that because they're separated into business and non-business mail when it comes in. And I need to deal with that probably this week. Those address labels and stamps that I could never find, they have a spot now. Non-farm projects, because we always have them, and it is a shared office space. So all that stuff at the top is actually a book that my wife has been playing around with writing. So it's a bunch of research. Important files, including, for me, the financial calendar, so that I have a reference for it right there. And other current projects. A printer, which you can see underneath my 3-year-old's art. And other things that we need to have around that end up migrating. Space for a current project, today's to-do lists, those kinds of things end up migrating a little bit, but there's always space left for the project. There's always space left for a to-do list. There's a recognition that you're going to have to dig out from under art projects periodically, but it's there. It's a little messy, but it'll do. And every so often it gets a little messier, and then it gets less messy, usually on a rainy day. When you're figuring out what's going to work for you, figure out whether analog or digital is going to work and for what. Some things, for me, I'm moving to QuickBooks. There's a lot of stuff that's really digital now, but I'm mostly an analog person. And I tried to upgrade from a paper version on the left to just doing a digital version like the one on the right. I failed, and I missed a couple of payments. And then I, had to pay extra fees. Not really a great plan for me. So I moved everything. I move everything to digital periodically, but for me, ultimately, the analog, it's a physical spreadsheet on the left is what I end up doing to make sure all of my bills are paid. You can see that there are different colors on the left, and that's actually, the maroon ones are automated. The black ones are personal. You can see, I think, 3 or 4 student loan payments somewhere in there. And then the green ones are the farm ones. So everything is stacked by when it's due in the month. There are dates in tiny text that you probably can't read all the way on the left side. And that lets me keep track of those things in an analog fashion. But eventually, everything ends up digital because digitizing it lets me do a lot of math. So you can see on the right-hand side across, at the bottom, it has what I spent per year by category. It has what the averages are. It really lets me see that my internet provider has been slowly creeping up the cost of internet every few months for the past 3 years, because I have about 3 years worth of information in there. And that's great information to have for personal as well as business finances. You need to know where the money's coming from and where it's going and how you can spot those kind of patterns. The one big con to this is that I can see how much I've spent on my student loans in the last 3 years, which is kind of depressing. Most of my other documents actually look like all the templates from the Carrot Project, because I used the templates from the Carrot Project, or occasionally from places like MDAR, which is the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, or other, UVM or Cornell, other places where you can get those kinds of templates. And the reason I did that is that I work hard enough. These people figured this out for me. I'm going to use that at least to start, and then I can tweak them after I use them for a while if it doesn't do everything that I'm looking for. So this is what my office ends up looking like for the most part. And recognizing imperfection is something that I've been fighting with for probably my entire life, but it's important, especially with finances, not to freeze, to realize that it's not, even if it's not perfect, some data, even fuzzy data, is better than no data when it comes to things like tracking your time. Some of it you have to get perfect for your taxes, but just trying to get a little bit better every year is something that has made it a lot more manageable for me to look at a task list like the financial calendar and be able to work with it. You're probably not going to get to do everything every year. I don't really know anybody who actually rewrites their business plan or updates it completely every year. I might add an addendum at the end, of a 3-year-old business plan that it needs to be fixed next winter. But figuring out what's going to motivate you and how to keep things moving in the right direction for you and for your farm is going to be what really works. And one of the things I found that really works for me is actually on my financial calendar, which I have an analog version of because I am an analog person. I wrote down the names of people that I can email or text with questions about business and finances. And although I suppose you could put Julia Shanks or Kira Bennett Hamilton on that list, for me, it's actually people that I took Making It Happen with in 2015. We were at the same table. We chatted about it afterward. We all felt like we were trying to figure out how to make our farm finances better. And to do that together meant that we now email back and forth occasionally of, hey, do you know how to do this in QuickBooks? Or I'm having some trouble with this. Anybody's got ideas? Which has been really helpful, knowing who and where you can find resources. Does anyone have any questions for me or for Julia or about the calendar?
Yes, actually, there is a question for you.
Excellent.
Yes, so Erin wants you to clarify how you keep track of your gas per job with your car notebook, because that looked awful fancy.
I keep track of my mileage per job, not my gas.
Okay.
I keep track of my gas all together. It ends up being paid all on the same credit card all the way through the year, which can make it easier looking at it digitally at the end of the year. But to be able to track how many miles each business used of the car's total for the year, I track how many miles.
Thank you. Awesome. Any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes before 1 o'clock. Well, we're happy to stick around for a few minutes, but please do stay in touch. You can find Kira. Here is her email address. I'm not going to spell it out. You can also find me. There's my email address and also more resources at the farmer's office. And if we can help you grow your business financially sustainably, let us know. And thank you all for attending today. So Erin, Kian, are you still there? Erin asks, not using a smartphone and having a busy calendar, do you set alarms or something on your watch if you're not in front of your computer all day?
I think I was muted. Okay.
Ah, yes. Now you are unmuted.
Excellent. That's one of the reasons that I do a lot of it looking back. There are some things that are pretty easy, but I tend to roughly keep track of time. I do wear a watch. And there are certain things that just, like since the evenings are blocked off for being home, I know about what it's going to look like in the world to be able to do that. But when it comes to the actual like tracking of things on the calendar, the regular blocked times, the early morning setting up the farm stand, the CSA day, the big overhaul for the farm stand each week before the weekenders show up, those are so regular that they stay put, and I know basically when those are going to happen. But the other things that are done kind of set as priorities day to day, I just kind of put that every day or every couple of days. I do it from memory. It's imperfect, but I can't do it in real time. I've tried and I've failed miserably every time I've tried, and I found that this is pretty close to accurate. It takes 2 minutes in the evening before I go to bed.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you all very much, and we hope we'll hear from you. Take care. Have a great afternoon.